Hello and a very warm welcome back to the television podcast from RTS London with me, Andrew Eborn, and Nadine Dereza. So, what's coming up on today's show, Nadine?
Well, we've got an action-packed show. We're going to start off by looking at Operation Lion with a top team of broadcasters. We're also going to see how BARB audiences measure those TV viewing figures. And finally, we'll have Frances Taylor's recommendations from the Radio Times, looking at her top picks for July.
Another fun-packed show. Do not touch that dial.
There was an event recorded earlier on in the year between RTS London and the RTS Technology Centre called Operation Lion, broadcasting a once-in-a-nation's-lifetime event. As the only monarch most of us have ever known, Queen Elizabeth II had a long and illustrious reign, which sadly came to an end last year. The processes and procedures around both her death and funeral had been well rehearsed by news organisations around the globe. But what was it like to witness to that once-in-a-lifetime event and shoulder the responsibility for how it was portrayed around the world? Well, we gathered the great and the good of UK-based news broadcasting teams behind the coverage to shed light on this historic event. And the panellists included Tami Hoffman, Head of News Productions and Archive at ITN Productions, John Whitney, the Deployment Editor for UK Newsgathering from the BBC, Kiko Itasaka, the producer from NBC, and Tim Forrest, the Content Editor of Projects at ITV News. And we pick up the event with the moderator, Anila, Dhami, the presenter and journalist, asking the following question.
As events unfold, the Queen's extended family making their way to Balmoral, we know that this is looking really serious. What are the next steps? Because you're still balancing that, aren't you, between getting everything and everyone in place, having those meetings, but the news still hasn't broken. So what are you doing there? What's happening in the meetings? Give us an insight into the chats you're having.
There were many things that fell in our favour that were not in our control. This happened just after the summer holidays. Largely, people were back. It happened during a period where there wasn't a massive foreign deployment. Largely, everybody was in place and ready. And so on top of everything that you've talked about having that confidence, I felt we were going into this in the right place, happening in the middle of a week as well. It fell in our favour and that confidence only grew, really.
And having 6 hours.
Yeah.
Although I am curious, I did think to myself, oh, Balmoral, and wonder how you all felt about that.
I was pleased because I'd spent loads of time on the Scotland plan and it was going to come off.
Our colleagues at BBC Scotland were excellent. They all had a plan. I just want to reiterate your weekday point as well. I think that was a major factor, the fact that it was a weekday. So we had a full staff in the office. It wasn't 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning. We had a staff that were ready and good to go and work on other stories that are much easier to move people around than it is getting them from scratch on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, and I really wouldn't underestimate the fact that we really did have a few hours to get our own heads together on it. I think it wasn't the JFK moment of where were you when you heard the news, because actually we had a few hours to absorb it. And when the news was actually announced, it was a really strange sense of calm.
At 6:30 on Thursday, the 8th of September, it was publicly announced that Queen Elizabeth II had died at 3:10 p.m. So Britain's longest reigning monarch and Queen of the UK and Commonwealth had died at the age of 96 at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. It was a historic moment, and the eyes of the world were focused on Balmoral, and they were absorbing the news. Tell us how you felt at that moment when that news broke on air.
Responsible, because we want to get it right. But interesting to hear what you're saying as well, Tami, because I felt the same, that our office was really quiet. You could hear a pin drop at the time. It was very quiet, it was very dignified, because I think the atmosphere outside in the newsroom can then represent the way it is on air as well. So I think that's a really important point about us, just all being calm, and it was very dignified and very quiet, no shouting around or screaming. It was all very organised, actually.
I think our office was similarly quiet. And I think even though we knew and we had hours to prepare, I still personally felt slightly shocked, like, oh, did this really happen? And I thought, oh, do I want to cry? I kind of want to cry. Oh, I don't have time to cry. Many breaking news stories, you do have people running around shouting, waving their arms. It seems to be part of kind of newsroom decorum to do that when there is a breaking news story. It's part of coverage. But in this instance, as I think everybody has said, it was calm, reflective, quiet, and everybody just said, okay, here we go.
But it was really big. I mean, it was really big. I had the editor on my left shoulder. I had the head of output just over further. I think everybody was crowded round my screen, which was looking at Twitter, and a deputy program editor's screen, which was looking at the royal family's website. And we were just pressing refresh and refresh and refresh. And everybody thought it was going to come on the royal website, and it came on Twitter. I've heard someone at Sky saying that it's the first time she's ever stood at the back of a gallery and said, it's on Twitter, break it. But it's where it dropped. It's where it landed.
And I suppose, although you've all described it being calm and quiet, what is it like to shoulder that responsibility? Because it is historic, that moment. When people, generations, are watching back, they'll be watching that moment covered on the news.
Look, you get into news to work in big stories, so you want to stand up at those moments. But obviously, it's incredibly important that you recognise what you're doing, that you're other people's eyes and ears to a certain degree. You work with that every day. This just happened to be a really, really big day, and we wanted to get it right.
I think I and many of my colleagues in London also, we really did feel an extraordinary amount of responsibility to make sure that our American colleagues got everything right as well. They weren't, for obvious reasons, as steeped in the history. They didn't grow up learning about the royal family. They don't necessarily know, which buildings are what, or, why it would take place at Westminster, why the funeral would take place at Westminster Abbey. They wouldn't necessarily know where the processional route was. Little things like, when they see the word M-A-L-L spelt, they say mall. And we have to say, we want them to get that right. So I think for us, our briefing books and having conversations with everybody, making sure that we had the right producers with correspondents who had flown in from overseas. Look, everybody had done their homework, and I think everybody did very well, but you just wanted to make sure you got it right.
Your mind moves quite quickly on once the announcement came to the events that are happening soon, like Prime Minister reaction, the moving moment of the flags in Buckingham Palace, all the other events that happened quite quickly. I thought very moving was the shots of people just gathering around Buckingham Palace, wasn't it? Yeah. Just being quiet and gathering. So quite quickly then moving into thinking about what you can do next. So it wasn't too much time at the time to reflect, really, was it? Because there's so much about to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid my thoughts were far more prosaic. I was just thinking, is this D? Is this D because it's happened quite late in the day? Or actually, are we going to be D-1? Because obviously you're starting to timetable out. And that was the really critical thing, that to actually put the plan in action, we needed to know where we were in the plan. So, yeah.
Tami, should we explain what we're talking about? Because we've suddenly gone into code.
Well, there's loads of code when it comes to Opline. I mean, that was part of the joy of it. But obviously, D was Day of Death. And then it was going to be D+1, D+2, and onwards. And the funeral will be on D+10. And these were dates kind of seared in my head. As it happened, the Day of Death became D-1 because an additional day got added into the whole schedule. And that was really kind of quite critical to the timetable. But yeah, that was probably my first thoughts. Where are we?
I must confess, when it came to D-1, I thought, oh, it's not 10 days, it's 11 or 12. And then I thought, oh, this is going to cost so much more than we thought it was going to cost. Because the reality is, as all the broadcasters in this room know, we're all really concerned. We're all under financial pressures. And I thought, oh my gosh, we've so carefully mapped out the costs, and a couple of extra days, oh no.
And I thought really differently, because I'd put a load of pieces together that were always in danger of being dropped because live stuff was going to happen. We always knew there was going to be a dynamic element to this. And I thought, an extra day, there's a chance it's going to get broadcast.
You had to cover so many different angles, perspectives, different procedures, processes would have taken place to make sure you're covering somebody who's visited from abroad, somebody who's laying flowers, to the actual processions and the formal events that are taking place. What editorial decisions are you making on each day? And are you thinking, actually, yes, we want more voices on the ground, or we want more of the procession? How do you make those decisions?
I think you go along with events, don't you? So the queue was absolutely a massive story, wasn't it? With so many people being involved, which I think, you know, that brought many more voices out, which we used a lot. I think it's important as well, you talk about how big it was as well, to mention at this point that the broadcasters, Sky, BBC, ITV, we worked really closely together on this. And I personally feel it worked really well for that time, because it's such a ginormous story. There's so many things for us to cover. You talked about all the different processions, etc. We can't do it by ourselves. No broadcaster can. So everybody working together is really important at that stage, and I think that worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because ITN is making the news for 3 different broadcasters, so they're all going to have their own different sort of editorial specifications. I think the important thing was about flexibility. You don't want to be too rigid in what your pre-planned packages and ideas are, because you want to be able to react to things like the queue. But I think, you know, broadly speaking, it was divided up between the ceremonial events and then news bulletins. And I think they had a different tone and a different role. I mean, it would be inappropriate, I think, to, start debating the role of the monarchy when you have the coffin of the monarch on the screen, as it was for hours and hours of that period. Whereas if you're then looking at, a Channel 4 news bulletin at 7 o'clock that evening, absolutely, one would want to hear a wider range of voices. So I think it was about kind of balancing more traditional news bulletins with the big ceremonial events.
And I think one other factor which I think impacts all of us now is that in addition to traditional broadcasts, as in morning news, breakfast news, evening news, lunchtime news, we now have, in NBC's case, we have a cable channel, MSNBC, which was wall-to-wall coverage. But we also have a streaming channel. And it was an interesting challenge. The streaming channel is relatively new. And I think we realized the tone is different, the audience is different. I shouldn't say the tone is different, because the tone has to remain appropriate, of course. But you're speaking to a different audience, and you are shaping coverage differently for each of these platforms. And it's a challenge, I think, that all broadcasters face going forward in a big event. You can't just put out the same thing. I mean, obviously, the moment of the funeral, you will all be on the same thing. But whether it's the cues, I would say for our streaming channel, we probably did a lot more coverage of people. We had to do possibly more explainers. So I think it's also working out which platform gets what kind of material and who's the best person to put that material together. It's a new challenge and it's tough.
How did social media play a role in this coverage, and how do you get that tone right? And also trust your presenters and reporters to get it right?
Look, social media is nothing new now. And I think I think for our presenters, for our correspondents, they are very used to knowing kind of where that line is. It's actually pretty well trodden. And with something as sensitive as the Queen, they get it. We didn't need to say anything to them. They got it.
But I think for us, what social media does do is it gives you real-time analytics of how your material is being viewed. I mean, we run a royal family channel, which is devoted to the royal family. And obviously this was a huge event for us. And I think because we could see, you get your geographical breakdown, you get your demographics about gender and age. And I think having that in real time and seeing the appetite was quite extraordinary, as well as being a bit of a dopamine hit, as you literally see the subscribers kind of racking up minute by minute. That's something we've not really had before in the same way for such a big event, to be able to get that kind of real-time feedback, and so that you can then then that becomes actionable, that you can use some of that information. There was enough days for us to use it in how we kind of shape stuff going forward. But yeah, the appetite was absolutely massive.
And for us, I was just saying, putting a lot of material on social media hopefully was attracting a younger audience who may not have been watching elsewhere. So that's the other vital part of it for us. But there's also a lot of information, wasn't there, to impart to the public? How to get to London to see different events, there's just so much information to get over as well. And social media was another vital way of doing that.
And in fact, when we actually did our rosters for the funeral day, a few people who we'd rostered off, either because they'd worked so many days in a row or because we needed them the next day, actually complained because they wanted to come in. You know, if you work in news, you want to be in a newsroom on the day of the Queen's funeral. So, yeah, it was a lot of people. And we brought in people from all over the organisation. You know, it wasn't just the news teams. There was quite a lot of sort of borrowing of people both from across ITN and other bits of ITV as well.
We actually doubled the size of our newsroom. We're currently in a temporary space that holds a certain number of people, and there's an atrium just next to it. And we built out the newsroom into the atrium so that people could go and sit there. And that's just in the building itself. The story was, out there.
Of course, there's no other major domestic news during that time, was there? Because so much other things closed down as a mark of respect. So you have a lot more resources available that way as well. We basically had like 2 hours to sort out something we normally could take days to sort out. We just got camera people lined up the whole way along the route, in hotel receptions or hotel balconies along the route. And they just all us, BBC and ITV and Sky, we all got together. We all did different sections of it and did it all live back for everybody. And something that normally takes ages to plan, we just did on the hoof, and it was really poignant shots, weren't they? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was
the pouring rain coming as they were flowing flowers.
Yeah, and it was dark, it was raining, you had all the lights twinkling, and you had that kind of weird, quiet noise that you have when you have a lot of people, but they're all being quiet.
Yeah.
And I found that to be one of the most moving sections of it. And as John said, that was the bit that in a way was most done on the hoof. We didn't have a beautiful kind of helicopter to take us through it all. We all just had to kind of make it work really quickly.
The policemen took off their hats, didn't they, as the coffee
yeah,
passed. It was
just really special.
It was very spontaneous and done very, as I say, on the hoof. But I'm really glad the way it turned out. And our BBC One programme at the time, which was live on air, took it. Again, it's just an example of everybody clubbing together to make it work because it's a responsible time for our audiences.
Well, I'd like to add it's thanks to the brilliant UK coverage of all of the broadcasters that the world, all of your international partners, be it ZDF or, CBC or CTV, we all benefited from that because that material was shared. So it's honestly, without that kind of material, without the extraordinary coverage, both inside the Abbey of all the processions, the chopper shots, that's what made us able to tell the story to the United States, to our American audience. But really, those are images that went around the world to millions and millions of people.
Fascinating stuff. And if you'd like to see the whole of the coverage of that event, pop along now to the RTS London YouTube channel. Next is BARB audiences. And I asked Matt Laycock, who's head of audiences, basically how they deal with the dark art of their statistics.
Well, first things first, we would deny that it's a dark art. The process by which BARB is allowed to operate is that as a joint industry currency, we're very open about the methodology that we use in order to measure TV in the UK, and we're happy to answer any questions about it. The specific way that this will be done is that we have a panel of 5,100 homes, which are nationally representative to the population across a whole range of different demographics and regionalities and so on and so forth. So the panel is effectively the country in microcosm. And in each of the homes, there is a meter installed, which measures what people watch on their TV. It's also comes with a handset so that people can register their presence in front of the TV. And every person within a home has a button which says that they are watching the TV. So when they sit in front of it, they press their button. And when they go away from the TV, they press their button again to say that they're no longer watching the TV. and that way we're able to take a view from across all of the panel to show exactly how many people are watching the TV within the panel, and then that gets grossed up statistically to make a picture of how many people would be watching if we were able to look at the whole of the population one by one.
Right. So that 5,100 homes, basically.
Yeah, it's 5,100 homes. But the other thing that we do nowadays, because TV has evolved so much, is that we also have what's known as a router meter, which effectively monitors the different broadcaster websites and TV apps that people go to when they're watching within their home on the other three screens besides the TV, so PCs and laptops, tablets or smartphones. And in that particular case, we're also able to identify when they go and watch different programs on different services there and add those into the viewing figures. And then very finally, there's a statistical process which we call the dovetail fusion process, which allows us to bring in big data, so census level data for the viewing that is done by different video on demand platforms like on the iPlayer or on ITVX. So we're able to include figures which are representative of the actual number of views that are being driven through those sorts of websites, and make sure that those are accurately represented by the panel alongside the viewing figures that we measure on television.
And that's got to be right, doesn't it, Matt? I think the dovetail fusion has got to be the future, because if a digital fingerprint is going to be far more reliable than just 5,100 people.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to increase the size of the panel in 2024 up to 7,000 homes, and we think that there is still a really important place for the panel, because what the panel provides is demographic information that you're not necessarily going to be easily able to get from digital fingerprinting or IP addresses or what have you. So it allows us an understanding of whether men or women are more likely to watch something, or younger or older people are able to watch something.
So finally then, Matt, if somebody wanted to take part, what would they have to do to persuade you that they should be on your panel?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say that the panel is the panel doesn't operate in that way, because it is nationally representative. It is recruited using a survey methodology from one of our research partners, and we look to make sure that we include people on the basis on a basis that allows for that selection to be done appropriately and above board, rather than getting massive TV fans necessarily to come and ask us to be on the panel.
So you approach them, they don't approach you. Is that basically what happens?
That's correct, yeah.
Matt Laycock, Audience Director from BARB Audiences, and Dovetail Fusion.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you for your time, Matt. That's brilliant, wasn't it, actually?
I love that. Is that really good? Fascinating.
Thank you for having us.
So thank you very much to Matt Laycock, and BARB are indeed a regular here on the television podcast. We look forward to seeing them again very soon. Well, in the last episode, I was speaking to Harvey Goldsmith. Next month, on July the 13th, it will be the anniversary of Live Aid, which took place on the 13th of July, 1985. And in celebration of that, we're going to play you the full Harvey Goldsmith fascinating interview. Just to give you a little bit of a flavour, here's a snippet now.
So I've got Bruce Springsteen playing Wembley Stadium. I've got WHAM going to Hong Kong and then delving into the unknown in China. And I've got Roger Waters doing his first solo dates with this hydrophonic head, which sat in the middle of Radio City, suspended, and the sound emanated up to the head and was then spread to speakers all around the theatre, which no one had ever done before. And I just, in the back of my mind, thought this is going to be chaos. And there's Bob driving me mad. You've got to do I said, I can't even think about it. I said, when I get back from China, if it's still there, I'd love to help. Bob came to see me, and he was kind of waiting for me and said, we've got to do this concert. And he gave me the dates he wanted to do. I said, no, you can't have those dates. Bruce Springsteen's doing them. he said, well, Bruce Springsteen will be part of it. I said, I doubt it, because that wasn't his way. Anyway, it was 10.5 weeks.
Well, it's now time to look at some top picks for July's TV viewing. And Frances Taylor, the previews editor from the Radio Times, is away at the moment, but so dedicated she is to the cause that she sent in her top 5 recommendations for us to read out. And let's start with WHAM.
We met when I was 11 and Andrew was 12.
And there was only ever one thing that I wanted to do. Be in a band with George.
Andrew changed my life in exactly the way someone needed to change my life if I was going to be a pop star.
And that was it. Wham!
WHAM, coming to Netflix on July the 5th. And this is a feature-length film documentary, and it's told exclusively through archive footage. That's both the late George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley narrating, telling the chronological story of how they came to be and what they went on to become.
And this is landing just a few weeks. In fact, it would have been the 25th of June, would have been George Michael's 60th birthday. And it's a stark, sad reminder of what a talent he was and what a tragedy his death in 2016 really was.
But there's so many nice details in there, such as how the pair met, aged 11 and 12 in school, and they did a demo tape in Andrew's front room, how they were rejected multiple times by record labels, and also examples like the first demo of those iconic songs, including Careless Whisper.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, really, because the music press at the time were very dismissive of them, largely because of their on-stage image. But their fortunes completely changed with a fortuitous appearance on Top of the Pops.
And Francis goes on to say there's a really sweet innocence about the whole thing. And any fans of WHAM will absolutely lap this up. Some of the darker or potentially more interesting areas are somewhat glossed over. And there's not really an exploration of the later years, but this is very much a polished highlights reel of one of the most iconic duos, Andrew, of the 80s.
Oh, I loved WHAM. Fantastic stuff. Music living to this day. Francis' next recommendation is Ellie Simmons' Finding My Secret Family, which airs on ITV1 on July the 6th. Now, there seemed to be a raft of celebrity confessional documentaries recently, but this one really does stand out from the others.
It certainly does. Ellie Simmons reveals that she is adopted, and it's an aspect of her life that she hasn't widely discussed. But now the gold medal-winning Paralympian and Strictly Come Dancing star wants to find out more about her birth family and why she was put up for adoption at just 2 weeks old.
Incredible. And although she does get resolution to some of her questions, the answers are incredibly distressing. Even as a viewer, it's horrendous and indeed shocking to hear some of the comments noted down at the time of her adoption. Yet Simmons is stoic and pragmatic about the choices her birth parents made. Although her steely resolve justifiably falters as the process to find her mother unfolds, she doesn't have an ounce of self-pity. It only makes your heart break for her even more.
It does, doesn't it? And Simmons also touches on the wider issue of adoption and children with disabilities, with some really upsetting stories and blunt, stark statistics about how many people registered for adoption are willing to welcome a child with a disability into their family. And Francis' next recommendation is Then You Run.
Oh my God, have you seen her nails? They're actually good. Who did those? Maybe you could.
I'm not asking to do my nan's nails.
I'm not thinking about me. I'm thinking about all 4 of us as auntie.
I need to speak to you about that. But why can't you come to Zanti?
I'm supposed to live with family. What family?
My dad. In Rotterdam.
I wanted your room to feel special. Oh, you don't like it?
I mean, if I was 9.
Then You Run, coming to Sky Max on July the 7th. And Francis said, and bear with us, there is a correlation here. BBC drama The Capture wasn't everyone's cup of tea. Francis really enjoyed it, despite the fact it was nonsensical at several points. And Andrew's going to explain the connection.
Well, that's basically what Francis said. There's a small flavour of that in this new drama because it's been adapted for television by Ben Channon, who coincidentally also wrote The Capture.
And it's based on the novel You by Zoran Drivenkar, and it's about 4 teenagers from London who are planning a summer holiday whose plans drastically change when they find themselves in the middle of a murky, drug-fueled world in Rotterdam, and soon they're on the run themselves.
And amongst the young cast are 2 standout up and coming stars. There's Leah McNamara, who's previously starred in Normal People, I think also Vikings if I remember rightly, and Vivian Opera, who's had a meteoric rise this year after playing the lead in instant cult classic Rye Lane.
And Francis goes on to say it's full of dark humour, and the first episode is promising, although you have to keep up with timelines, as apparently there's 3 different hops just in the first 8 minutes. So, Andrew, you need to pay attention.
I always do, you know that, Nadine. It's got to be good. But you'll want to see where their story takes them. And as characters, they're refreshing, as not all of them are instantly wholly likeable. They actually feel like real, flawed people. Next up, we have The Bear Season 2, which is available on Disney Plus on July the 19th.
Opening a restaurant. Gotta go hard every day. Gotta control the zone.
I love the name.
You don't remember the name.
Of course I remember the name.
We didn't even tell anybody
You
the name.
100% told me the name.
How could you remember the name?
Well, a little flavour of The Bear Season 2, available July the 19th on Disney Plus. Last year, The Bear became one of those shows that everyone was talking about. It was a huge word-of-mouth success, and anticipation has been sky high for a second series. It was also nominated for a BAFTA earlier this year.
And rightly so. It's already aired in certain territories already, with reviewers citing that it gets bigger and better than the first season. And Francis says, what an incredibly exciting prospect. I'm in agreement with Francis.
Oh, absolutely. And if you haven't seen it, well, let me tell you, it's a drama set in Chicago. It revolves around a sandwich kitchen run by Kami, who's played by Jeremy Allen White. And there are heated arguments, setbacks, highs and lows, but in the ensemble cast of really well-written characters that gave the show added punch.
And season 1 ended on a cliffhanger that looks set to change the course of Kami's life. And season 2 sees him deciding to open a new restaurant with a new menu, which brings even more chaos than before. Well, I'm not surprised, are you?
I think you're probably absolutely right. But if you haven't seen it yet or heard of it, do catch up with season 1 before all 10 episodes of season 2 arrive on Disney Plus on July the 19th. Coming up, our last recommendation is 15 Love, which goes out on July the 21st on Amazon Prime Video.
I know who you are. You are 2 wins away from your first Grand Slam title. I know what happened to you. Something like that is really hard to recover from.
Some people are hard to recover from.
Like Glenn Lapthorne? No, stop.
And that was a great clip of 15 Love coming to Amazon Prime Video from the 21st of July. And that's really hot on the heels of Wimbledon. And this tennis-based drama feels really timely, doesn't it, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely. And the main draw that will pique people's interest in 15 Love is that the lead is played by Nadine's favourite from Poldark, Aidan Turner. And he plays a so-called maverick coach called Glenn, who teaches rising tennis star Justine, played by relative newcomer Ella Lily Highland. But their relationship is far more complicated than just staying on the court.
And since she's had a huge rise to fame in the Grand Slam tennis, reaching the semi-finals of the French Open, however, an injury on court causes her career to collapse. And 5 years later, she makes an allegation against her former coach.
And it's from the same production company behind Vigil and Line of Duty. It looks like we can expect a lot of twists, turns and cliffhangers in this 6-part drama. Well, those are the recommendations for this episode from the wonderful Francis. She will join us again, hopefully in person next time.
As we head towards the end of this episode of the television podcast from RTS London, I just want to quickly mention a fantastic event taking place called TikTok Talent, Creating Content for TV Success, an event brought to you by RTS London later on in the month. And as we know, TikTok has rapidly grown to be a major force over the last 4 years, really defining cultural conversations through the creative expression of its top creators.
Absolutely. Well, it's now increasingly the go-to platform to launch a career in entertainment. All sorts of names from Addison Rae, Charlie D'Amelio, Francis Bourgeois, and even my good friend Sam Ryder all started there. On the reverse side, the TV industry now has access to a fresh pool of unique talent to star in new projects.
Certainly does, and it's going to be hosted by TikTok's UK Head of Entertainment, Edward Libman, and Edward's going to be joined by some amazing household names, including Greg James, of course, the Radio 1 host, breakfast host, and so much more, and Munya Chihuahua.
So do pop along to RTS London, check the details on the website. It's taking place on Wednesday, the 26th of July, and see how they leverage TikTok talent to succeed in TV.
So that's it. Thank you so much for listening to the television podcast from RTS London. Of course, remember you can watch us too at the RTS London YouTube channel. And of course, if you want to follow us on Twitter, then it's RTS_London, or myself, Nadine Dereza. I'm at Nadine Dereza or at Andrew Eborn. So thank you so much for listening or watching. It's all that we've got time for now. So thank you very much from me, Nadine Dereza, and from him, Andrew Eborn.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.